August 14, 1944. Somewhere on the road between Avranches and Le Mans, France, two military police officers pulled a black American soldier from a field hospital cot, not from a battlefield, not from a prison. From a hospital bed where he had been recovering from a shrapnel wound to the left thigh sustained 3 days earlier during Third Army's breakout across the Loire River corridor. The charge was not desertion, not insubordination, not any act committed after his wounding. The charge was that he had been sitting in the wrong section of a rear area mess hall before his unit moved forward. A segregation violation, a matter of where a wounded man had chosen to eat a meal. The two MPs had the paperwork. They had the authority. They had the institutional weight of an army that was, in August 1944, still formally segregated by order of the War Department. What they did not have was any idea that the Third Army's commanding general had been informed. George Patton arrived at that hospital within the hour. What he did when he got there was never entered into any official record. It was documented only in the accounts of the men who witnessed it, German prisoners working as orderlies in the hospital wing included. And those German prisoners told their story after the war. To understand why that moment carried the weight it did, you must understand the precise institutional framework of the United States Army in 1944. The U.S. Army that fought the Second World War was a segregated army. Executive Order 8802, signed by President Roosevelt in June 1941, had prohibited racial discrimination in the defense industry. It had said nothing about the military. Black American soldiers served in separate units, ate in separate mess facilities, slept in separate barracks, and were treated and processed in separate medical facilities, wherever the Army's administrative system could enforce the separation. The War Department's official position, codified in Army Regulation 21010, was that segregation was not to be construed as derogatory to any race, but was a matter of military efficiency. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, defended the policy in congressional testimony in February 1944 as a matter of avoiding the complications that would arise from mixing races in military units. The policy was not a relic. It was active doctrine, enforced daily by military police units whose authority to maintain segregation rules in rear areas was explicit and documented. Into this system, Patton had inserted himself, not loudly, not politically, but operationally, in a way that had already created friction with Army administrative staff before. August 1944. His Third Army included black support units. He had reviewed their records. He had visited their positions. He had formed an opinion. And on August 14, 1944, that opinion collided with two MPs and their paperwork. The German view of American racial policy in 1944 was not incidental. It was strategic. Wehrmacht intelligence, the Abwehr, and later the Sicherheitsdienst's Foreign Intelligence Branch, had been monitoring American racial tensions since 1941 and had incorporated the assessment into propaganda directed at black American soldiers. Leaflets dropped by German aircraft over American positions in North Africa in 1943 carried a specific message: "Why are you fighting for people who treat you like animals?" The leaflets were signed "Your German enemies, who respect you more than your own commanders." General Alfred Jodl, chief of the Wehrmacht Operations Staff, noted in a September 1944 intelligence briefing that American racial division represented a structural vulnerability in Allied cohesion that the German army could exploit, not militarily, but psychologically. If black American soldiers could be made to doubt the purpose of their sacrifice, their fighting effectiveness would degrade. The two MPs who pulled the soldier from the Bad Birkenau hospital were not acting out of malice in the sense of conscious cruelty. They were implementing policy, following orders, processing a violation through the system as the system required. But the system had a cost that neither MP was calculating. Every black soldier in Third Army's support and combat units who heard about this incident, and word moved fast in 1944, was processing one question: if I bleed for this army, does this army protect me? The answer that question received would determine whether German intelligence had correctly identified a structural vulnerability, or whether one American general was about to prove them wrong. What Patton found when he arrived at that hospital changed the answer entirely. Patton had been told about the incident by his chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay, at approximately 10:30 hours on August 14th. Gay's account of the conversation, recorded in his personal diary and later cited in biographer Carlo D'Este's 1995 study of Patton, described the general's response as unusually quiet, not explosive, not theatrical. Quiet in the way that, Gay had learned over years of service with Patton, meant the decision had already been made before the sentence was finished. Patton arrived at the field hospital at 11:45 hours. The soldier, Private First Class Calvin Dorsey, 3rd Quartermaster Truck Company, 3rd Army, was still on his cot. The MPs had not completed their processing. They were in the hospital administrator's office, working through the paperwork required to move a hospitalized soldier to a disciplinary holding area. Standard procedure. It took approximately 90 minutes from initiation to completion. They had used 40 of those 90 minutes when Patton walked through the ward. He stopped at Dorsey's cot. He did not ask for a briefing. He looked at the wound dressing on the man's left thigh, shrapnel, 3 days old, sutured and bandaged by a regimental surgeon on August 11th, and then he looked at Dorsey's face. He asked one question. He asked where Dorsey's unit had been on August 11th. Dorsey told him, outside Laval, on the Le Mans Road, moving supplies under artillery fire during the 3rd Army's breakout operation. Patton nodded. He turned and walked to the hospital administrator's office. What he said to the 2 MPs was witnessed by 3 hospital staff members and, critically, by 4 German prisoners of war who were serving as orderlies in the facility under Geneva Convention provisions for prisoner labor. All 4 German prisoners were interviewed by U.S. Army intelligence officers in October 1944 as part of a routine prisoner assessment. Their accounts, translated and filed separately, are consistent on the core exchange. Patton told the MPs that Private Dorsey had been wounded moving supplies under fire to support 3rd Army's combat operations. He asked the MPs whether either of them had been under artillery fire at any point in the previous 30 days. Neither had. Patton told them that a man who had been under fire contributing to the mission of 3rd Army would not be removed from a hospital bed to answer a charge about where he had eaten a meal. He then told them to leave. The MPs pointed out that they had authority under Army Regulation 21010 and the standing segregation orders for the theater. Patton told them that he had authority over every soldier in 3rd Army's operational area, that Dorsey was a soldier of 3rd Army, and that their paperwork was now void. He was not, in the strict legal sense, correct. Army Regulation 21010 operated independently of Field Army Command Authority in rear areas. Patton knew this. The MPs knew this. But there is a difference between what the regulation permits and what 2 junior-grade military police officers are willing to enforce when a 3-star general is standing 4 feet away telling them to leave. They left. Patton returned to Dorsey's cot. He sat down in the chair beside it, the chair a nurse used during wound checks, and spoke with the man for approximately 10 minutes. No staff account records the precise content of that conversation. What the hospital administrator noted in his daily log was this: General Patton visited Ward C. Remained approximately 12 minutes. Patient Dorsey resting comfortably at end of visit. Resting comfortably. After 2 MPs had just tried to remove him from his bed for eating in the wrong seat. The German orderlies watching from across the ward recorded a different detail in their intelligence interviews. One of them, Gefreiter Hans Weber, 276th Infantry Division, captured near Brest in August 1944, described what he saw as the American general sitting with the Negro soldier as if they were the same rank. He said this with, according to the intelligence officer's notation, apparent surprise. Weber had been told, through years of Wehrmacht propaganda, that American society was fracturing along racial lines. He had been given leaflets that described Black American soldiers as second-class fighters for a nation that despised them. What he saw in that ward did not match the leaflets. The Bad Birkenau incident, as it came to be known in Third Army's informal internal record, was not singular. It was the most documented instance of a pattern that defined Patton's relationship with Black American soldiers throughout the 1944-1945 campaign. The 761st Tank Battalion arrived at Third Army on October 31, 1944. They were the first Black armored unit committed to combat in the European theater. Their assignment to Third Army had not been universally welcomed in Army administrative circles. The War Department had debated their deployment for months. The concern was not their training. The 761st had trained for 2 years at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, logging more gunnery hours per crew than most white armored battalions. The concern was institutional. What precedent did committed Black armor set for the segregated Army structure? Patton's response to the debate, delivered to the 761st on the day they arrived, was recorded by the battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, and repeated. In multiple post-war interviews, Patton stood before the assembled battalion and said, "I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches." It was not an elegant speech, but it was unambiguous. And in October 1944, for men who had trained 2 years and been kept from the fight by administrative hesitation, unambiguous was what they needed. The 761st fought continuously for 183 days, from November 7, 1944, to the German surrender in May 1945. They participated in the Battle of the Bulge, the drive across Germany, and the liberation of several concentration camps in the final weeks of the war. Their casualty rate was 34%, 71 killed, 223 wounded, of a total authorized strength of 750 men. Here is the counterintuitive truth the German intelligence assessment had entirely missed. The structural vulnerability they had identified, racial division in the American military, was real. The segregation was real. The injustice was real. The 2 MPs and their paperwork were real. But the German assessment assumed that the injustice would compound, that it would deepen doubt and degrade commitment with each passing month of a war fought in the name of freedom by men denied it at home. They had not accounted for men like Patton. Not because Patton was a racial progressive. He was a product of his era, with all the contradictions that implies. But because Patton's operational standard was absolute and applied without exception, the man who fought deserved the protection of the army he fought for. The Germans had a word for this principle. They called it Kameradschaft. Comradeship. Brotherhood in arms, regardless of origin. They believed Americans were incapable of it across racial lines. They were wrong. The operational record of Black American units in Third Army provides 4 distinct layers of proof that the German intelligence assessment had misjudged the situation completely. The first is the 761st Tank Battalion's combat record. In 183 days of continuous operations, the battalion destroyed 461 enemy vehicles, captured 30 towns, and killed an estimated 6,246 enemy soldiers, according to Third Army's after-action reports filed between November 1944 and May 1945. These numbers are not inflated claims from the battalion's own history. They are drawn from Third Army's operational summaries, cross-referenced with German unit records captured after the war. The second is the prisoner response. German prisoners captured in sectors where the 761st operated reported, in multiple intelligence interviews, that they had not initially known they were facing a Black American unit. This detail matters. The Wehrmacht's racial ideology had led German commanders to privately rate Black American formations as inferior, less aggressive, less capable, less determined than white formations. The 761st's performance in the field produced a swift revision. A December 1944 prisoner interrogation report from Chicoor noted that German soldiers taken near Morville-les-Vicq described the American armor opposing them as extremely aggressive, and difficult to repel. They did not know it was the 761st until after capture. The third is the strategic dimension. German propaganda targeting Black American soldiers, the leaflet campaign, the radio broadcasts, the careful cultivation of racial grievance as a weapon, produced measurable results in some theaters. In Third Army, it produced almost none. The desertion and surrender rate among Black American support and combat units in Third Army was below the Army-wide average for all units regardless of race. The fourth is General Jodl's own post-war admission, recorded during his interrogation at Nuremberg in October 1945. He stated that German assessments of American racial division as a combat-degrading factor had proven incorrect in execution. He did not say why. The answer was sitting in a field hospital ward in France in August 1944. Calvin Dorsey returned to his unit in late August 1944 after his wound healed. His service record shows continuous duty through the end of the war. He was discharged in September 1945 at the rank of corporal. His personnel file contains no disciplinary notations. The mess hall incident, the one the two MPs had come to process, does not appear anywhere in his permanent record. It was as if it had never happened. Hans Weber, the German orderly who watched Patton sit beside Dorsey's cot, was repatriated to Germany in 1946. His intelligence interview from October 1944, the one where he described his surprise at seeing an American general treat a black soldier as an equal, was declassified in 1978. Weber was located by American historians in 1981. He confirmed the account and added one detail he had not included in the original interview. He said that after Patton left the ward, the other German orderlies had discussed what they had seen. They had been told that American democracy was a lie, that America's racial divisions made it a fundamentally dishonest society fighting a war for principles it did not practice. What they had watched in that ward, Weber said, had complicated the argument. Not resolved it. Complicated it. One man, one decision, one 10-minute conversation beside a hospital cot. The principle it embodies is not political. It is operational and universal, the institution that protects its own, without exception, without asterisk, without paperwork, builds the only loyalty that holds under fire. Loyalty purchased with consistency cannot be dissolved by propaganda.